Yo guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another Turbo Tyler video, and today we're doing something I've wanted to do to the Focus since I bought it, which is install this air intake. So we've got a few things that we need to put on the car today because an air intake on a Focus ST isn't as simple as a pipe and a filter. So this is what they call the Focus RS ECU enclosure. So when we do this intake, we're going to be getting rid of this factory air intake box. This is where the panel filter sits, and this is where the ECU holder sits. So this is going to go, and the ECU is going to be relocated into this box, and that'll sit just down in there. Then what we also have is the actual main pipe itself. So not only is this a 3-inch, so a larger diameter than the factory one, it gets rid of all these bends, because every time you've got a bend, you slow the air down. So this ends up sitting roughly there, just like over the engine, which looks a lot nicer. It's a lot more similar to how the RS intake is as well. Few clamps mounting, some silicone. This is essentially like they call it the turbo elbow, but the OEM one you'll see when we take it off, it's baffled inside like a muffler, which reduces like turbo noises. So this is also going to give us some more turbo noises, and we step up. So instead of being that diameter, we're now that diameter. So that's also going to increase some flow, and that ends up sitting just down there. And then the last sort of piece of this intake thing is we're going to be installing what they call the RS vac pipe. So this, along with the wiring loom extension, is going to get rid of this whole scenario. So we're going to get rid of all of these pipes and move the plug over to the back with the loom extension, and that is going to sit in there basically like that. It simplifies it, and it gets all of this out of the way, because that's eventually where our actual filter is going to sit. So this kit does come with a filter optional, but I didn't get the filter because I want to get a bigger one. So what we're going to do is install all of this stuff onto the car today. Then I can measure up, we'll get a filter and put that on, and then we'll get some sound clips and show you guys what it sounds like. But first of all, we're just going to get rid of the wiper cowl because it's going to make it a lot easier. So get rid of the wiper cowl now. So what I want to do to start with is just remove all of the factory items that we're not going to keep. So we've got to remove the air intake pipe, the turbo elbow piece down there. Then I'll work on removing the MAF sensor, which we need to fit back onto the intake we're putting in. Then we can remove the airbox and ECU. And then finally, once all that's out of the way, I think what I'll do is get on to doing the RS vac pipe section of this. So let's go ahead and just start removing stuff. Alright guys, so that's the last part of this factory intake that we have to remove before we can actually get this out. Now, if you've never removed one of these before, it is a little tricky. I've only done it a few times, so I still struggle with it myself. But there's 3 dowels, and what you need to do first is just grab it and pull up to remove it off those dowels. So, like that, now that's removed from the dowels. And what you're going to find is it's going to be very difficult to get this section of the intake out. And what you want to be very careful of is there's a sensor down there. I think it's like a coolant temp sensor. You want to be very careful not to damage that, and the ECU obviously, and anything else surrounding. And you kind of need to just wiggle it out. So I'm very thankful that is the last time I have to remove this shitty ass intake. This is a terrible design from factory. So you've got the ECU in-house with the intake, which isn't necessarily a bad design because it allows the air to cool the ECU. But if we look, the air was coming in through there, which is fine, and going to our panel filter. But look, then the air has to go through this like grated section, through this tiny as piece, to then come out through there. So you restrict your airflow down to such a small as little thing, it's ridiculous. So now what we're gonna have is just straight 3-inch all the way back to when we have to reduce down to the turbo. So this is gonna give us way more airflow, which is really good. So let's just place that there for a second. The other really cool thing about having that box out the way is now we've got access to all this whole part of the engine, and we couldn't see any of this before, which is going to be really nice when we're at the track trying to fault trace and stuff like that. Like, I can see now straight away. I'm pretty sure this is the auxiliary water pump. Like, I can see straight away now, like, if it's leaking from there. I can see my oil filter housing, which is weeping a little bit, which I'm going to have to sort in another video. I can see all these wires. Like, already I'm seeing this is unclipped, so that needs to get clipped back in there just like that. Starter mode is now way more accessible, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm real happy about that as well. Like, even the dipstick, I can see all of this where I couldn't see it before. Charge pipe, see that, lower coolant hose. So even doing this intake just for accessibility and being able to just see is going to be so much nicer. So yeah, this is the last thing we've got to take off now. The turbo elbow, the hose clamp. If you come around the back of me here, Robert. I'll grab my torch. The hose clamp is a bit difficult to see, but it is down there. I've taken this off a few times now, so I know that my Jubilee hose is pointing that way. So I know if I go put my arm down back here, I can get that quite easily. So I'm going to take that off, and then what we're going to do is move on to removing this part. So like I said, you don't actually have to do this, and Jamie's kit, so Jamie's Oem Denied kit, does come with a solution to doing this. I just chose to do the RS vac line because I think it looks cooler. So yeah, we'll remove that and then get started on this part. So this is that turbo elbow I was talking about. This end bolts onto the turbo, and this is where our intake bolts onto. And hopefully you guys will be able to see down in there is all baffled. Those little holes are all baffles, which disrupts airflow, which not only affects performance, but mainly affects the noise. And if we compare that side by side to the one that we're putting on the car, we'll see it's also a bit bigger of a diameter as well. It's just going to be a lot less restrictive. So I'm really looking forward to starting to install that. But before we can do that, I think it's going to be easier to install our RS vac line. So what we have to do, pretty simply, is we need to unclip it from the back where it bolts onto the firewall and remove it from here where it goes into the brake booster. And once that's off and we've removed the electrical connector as well, we can then cut it so that we can fit this to it and reinstall all of that back onto the car. So we'll get started with doing that now. So now that we've pulled that out, the brake servo, that's the standard vacuum sort of system removed. And what we end up doing essentially is removing this whole section, and all we do is take this part and move that over to here. So you end up having to cut it and then add the new pipe in and stuff like that, and then you just plug in the wiring loom extension onto that plug and then route it under the battery, and it moves over there. So it's going to look a lot cleaner, a lot cooler as well. So I think what we'll do is start chopping this up and whatnot so we can add our RS vac pipe on. Okay, so we heated that up with the heat gun, but we made a little bit of a mistake because we heated it a little bit much and now it's kind of all deformed, so that's a bit of an issue, but I've blown into it and I can't feel any air coming out of that gap. I think I'm just going to wrap it and see if the car gives any issues for vacuum leaks or whatnot, but yeah, I'm a bit disappointed about that, but there's not really much I can do. That one we couldn't cut because that we need to keep, whereas this stuff here can be cut because we don't need to keep it. We just need to keep the sensor. So I think what I'll do is grab a knife and we'll cut that and see if we can get those off. Yeah, that'll come now. There we go. That's one. And that's two. So this stuff, these parts you don't really need anymore, and essentially what we do, I believe, is it's going to be set up like this now. That's how it's going to be set up, but we'll double check the instructions and hope for the best that this isn't going to be an issue. So in order to have enough room for the sensor to fit at the back, we need to shorten the length of this pipe slightly. So I've just marked 20 mil from the end, and we're just going to cut it down. Now the problem with this is this bit at the end is actually stepped up to allow for this size to fit into it. So it's going to make it a lot more difficult to get this in. But I've mocked it up on the car. The instructions just say some people cut it, some people don't. But I think I'm going to cut it because otherwise this is not going to sit flush. It's not going to sit right. So I'm just going to make my cut here. So now we need to heat this section up now that we've shortened it a little bit to get the sensor sitting in there like that. But before we need to do that, if we have a look at the plug, it's got these tabs on. It did have another one here, but I've cut that off now because the instructions tell you to. So you need to get the last one now, get a knife, and we'll just try without damaging the plug. God, this is going to be so difficult. Alright guys, so putting these vacuum lines onto this sensor, as you can probably tell because I'm out of breath, was an absolute nightmare. It's a lot harder than it looked on the videos, even with heating it up. And this one, there's a bit of a gap to where it is. It is on the three grooves, but I'm not super confident in this whole pipe, to be honest. I just really hope it doesn't leak. So I've wrapped it in some electrical tape and we'll just have to see. Worst case scenario, I think I can just even go all the way down to there and just cut it, and then this will just be on a bit of an angle going into the plenum. But both of them are on now, but unfortunately that's all we have time for today. So next time you see us, it'll be in a few days time, where all we got to do now is install the rest of the parts so I can measure up and get the filter.
Day 2.
Alright guys, so day 2 of the intake install. So far, all I've done today is wash out the intake pipe, because you're supposed to wash it out in case there's any bits of metal in there or anything like that. But what I want to do now, before I put that RS vac line back in, because it's going to be easier if I do that later, is get the intake in. And the first part of that is installing the RS ECU holder. So what I've done so far is I've removed my factory ECU. So I've removed the ECU from the factory air intake. And this is the bottom half of the RS ECU enclosure, and you just install it on the 3 mounting tabs using the original screws. You just want to place that in there so the plugs face outwards, just over those tabs, like that, and we'll screw that in just now through those 3 points there. And then if we come back over to the car side, the ECU originally mounted somewhere over here, but now it's going to mount over there. So we need to get it out of this plastic harness that it's in, then wrap all of these cables in some electrical tape, and then we can move it over. So pretty simply what we've got to do is a zip tie there, I think there might be a few other zip ties somewhere else on it. We'll get rid of those. Oh, there's another one right there. Get rid of those zip ties, unclip it from the plastic casing, and then we can start to relocate everything over to this side, just over to the left. So we'll go ahead and start that now. Alright, so that's the ECU relocated over now. Was really simple. There's no crazy wiring or anything you got to do. Looks like the cover's fitting relatively well. So yeah, it's actually quite cool that the cover ends up covering over the plugs so they don't get damaged or anything like that. I do quite like that. Yeah, the wires are a little bit tight, but should be okay. I can't see why it won't be, because that's how the kit's meant to be. So now what I'm going to move on to is installing the actual crossover pipe, and we'll start with that turbo elbow just down there. Okay, so the main section of the intake is now in. A few other little bits we still need to tidy up, but at this point now that the big items are in, I want to put this back in and make sure this is all going to fit. So it should be a case of...
Three hours later.
The only other thing we need to do now on the RS vac line side of things is plug in this wiring loom, but I'm having an issue with it, which I'll show you guys right now. The plug that they've supplied me with has this additional piece on the plug for whatever reason, and that isn't allowing it to press into the sensor, as you guys can see. So I think I'm just going to have to cut that piece off, but I'm just going to hold off that right now because the intake, I just need to install 2 more things before I can measure up and buy the air filter, which is literally just add on that silicon piece there and then add on the MAF sensor, making sure the airflow is facing that way. So we'll chuck those 2 pieces on now, which you guys will see after I've got the filter. So we're going to order a filter. It should be about a week. So I'll touch base with you guys once I've got an air filter for them.
Several days later.
Alright guys, so the intake install is finally finished. Since you guys last saw me, what I've done is go ahead and put the filter on. So this is a Leo filter, it happened to be the right size to fit over the MAF and perfect size to get in here. So we went ahead and got that filter, and then once I had it all test fitted and took it for a drive, I came back, took it apart so I could heat wrap it. So this is gold reflective heat tape. Up here, it's not really as necessary as it is down here, because right down there where I'm pointing is the turbo, and that's where a load of heat is going to come up, and we want to keep the intake temperatures as cold as possible to keep that air dense. I have to say I'm absolutely in love with the way it looks. It looks exactly as I was hoping it to, and it sounds super cool as well. So I'll take you guys out for a drive in it now, and we'll get some sound clips.
Yep.
Alright guys, so that is going to be it for today's video on the intake install. I'm so glad I finally got around to doing it. As soon as I bought this car, the two main things I wanted to do was my catback exhaust, which we got done a while ago now, and the intake, so we got all the cool noises. Now I'm pretty much got everything I wanted before I did my stage 1 tune, so you guys better stay tuned to the channel, because we're going to be stage 1 tuning this car very, very soon. And yeah, it's going to be a big difference. Still got plenty of other mods. Up next for the focus really is the tune and the coilovers, because the ride height and the handling is another thing that really lets this thing down at the moment. So yeah, tune and coilovers, so we are getting into some proper mods now, guys. So yeah, stay tuned. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.